ask an additional question. When someone says they're okay, maybe just, give them another opportunity to provide a secondary statement to that, because you probably know they're not quite okay. Like all those things that like we probably did when we met in person, and we definitely did at the beginning of COVID. Everybody took 10 minutes at the beginning of a call.
Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they all have in common? They're all human. Because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Karl Pontau. This week, I'll bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Siobhan Daukes. Siobhan is a chief of staff with over 20 years of operational and commercial experience, making magic happen across agencies, tech startups, and small businesses. She is the ultimate momentum maker, helping CEOs, founders, and leadership teams get out of their own heads, get stuff done, and have fun while doing it. Congrats on being the ultimate momentum maker, and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Hi, Carl, and thanks for having me.
So I really am excited to have you on the show because we're going to be talking about something that it sounds like you're an expert at, and something I know a lot of entrepreneurs, including myself, struggle with, which is living life outside of work. Especially for people that are in the startup space, it can be really all-consuming, especially early on as they're trying to grow this thing from nothing. And from just the little bit of chat we had before hitting recording, it sounds like you have some awesome life experiences that I'm sure help you when you bring yourself to the work environment, because you give yourself time to be refreshed and have experiences that help you learn how to connect with people on a human level. So tell me more about your approach to living life outside of work and how that helps you be more effective when you go and work with the teams that you work with.
Well, I think it probably for me, and maybe this is going to sound a little bit cheesy, but I think for me, it really is around integration. So I don't tend to use words like in work, out of work. I kind of see myself as just me. I have a certain amount of time, hours, minutes, whatever it is. I get to choose how I spend those, bringing it down to, I guess, the most simplest form. I can do some of them, making sure that the hours I spend, pay the mortgage, so to speak. But they don't all have to. And it also doesn't have to be equal. Like I'm very lucky. I've built a wonderful career with a lot of amazing people in that. I work with them over and over again. And so I think, sometimes the irony is some of the projects that I'm doing, a very small percentage of them are the ones that are maybe what we would call the definition of work and, paying the mortgage. And maybe many others of them are, nourishing me in other ways. And I guess I kind of try and think about that a little bit around, like, if currency wasn't the description of money and it was the description of energy and how you spend your time and those things, then I need to make sure that works, and it needs to be even, and it needs to feel good for me. And we all know when it doesn't feel good, and whatever that looks like for you, whether that's, moving, traveling, cooking, being creative in other manners, watching TV, whatever it is, I think that kind of overall equation has to work, and you need to check in that it's working with yourself. So I think for me, that's kind of how I try and get up and do things. And if it's not feeling good, I usually know it pretty damn quick too. And then it's about, looking in the mirror and going, am I going to hold myself accountable to the fact that this isn't working and I need to take a different route? And even though that's really scary, because yes, I've got an email I need to reply to, or a presentation I'm meant to write, or somebody who's relying on me, like, I also know that if I don't slow down and take a look at those things, I won't speed up in other areas.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, that not to try and separate the work, who you are at work, to who you are outside of work, because you are just yourself all the time, and that it's that whole adage of you got to secure your own life, your own like face mask first before helping other people. And if you aren't able to show up and be yourself at work because you're either like stressed out, or you're just there's 100 other things that are out of whack with your life, then you're not going to be successful, and and it's gonna, if you're, especially if you're in a leadership role and you're burning out because you're working like the third month of 18-hour days and you aren't really having a life outside of the office, then you're not able to connect with people as well as if you had other shared life experiences or hobbies or passions that you could talk about and build relationships around. And I think a lot of leaders and just also employees get so sucked into who they are as a professional that they don't really build an identity outside of the work they do, and it's to their own detriment.
Yeah, and it's a lot of work too, right? Like it's hard to, to not. I love the movie Inside Out. Like I'm obsessed with it, and I think that like I think about it a lot in terms of the little versions of me and the voices of me, and like I think it's hard to also ignore them. Like if you have to work hard to go, oh, just this little voice that's here going, do this, and you have to tell it to be quiet. That's a lot of work. Like, and in many ways it can be a little more easier, or, to kind of just be a bit of graceful with it, give it some time to, go, oh, no, okay, you're not really helpful right now. We're going to talk later tonight, and I almost mean it in the way I'm describing it, like, why can't it be playful? Why can't it be those voices? Why can't they be acknowledged, and, asked maybe to like come forward or, quieten down a little bit depending on the certain times. But like, for me, that's the beginning of making a relationship with yourself, is making friendship or connection, as you probably would call it, with all those versions of yourself. And then it becomes not easy, because I don't think it's ever easy, but like certainly becomes a little more doable as you then take it outside of this and do the next version of whatever that is with your immediate friends, partners, colleagues, whatever that might look like, so yeah, I think it starts there.
And I think what you touched on there about, I love Inside Out as well, because of that, helping kind of label and identify the different emotions you're feeling. Yeah. I think a lot of people, especially a lot of leaders, they don't have a great like emotional intelligence about themselves, how their own emotions are playing out inside their own heads. And so if you're struggling to even know how you're feeling, it's almost impossible to be able to empathize with other people and know how they're feeling, because you don't really have the tools to describe how you feel yourself. And so I think I like that you're suggesting there on using that visualization of and the mindfulness of your own emotions and understanding how you're different, how well you're balancing out your time and your energy, can help understand what parts of your life need more focus than you're necessarily giving them at this point, if you're so focused on work and you're not developing other relationships or doing other hobbies or activities that bring you that self-actualization, self-joy, self-care. Then it can help at least people realize where they need to be focusing to help themselves better.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And look, maybe it can start in work, right? Like it doesn't have to, it's scary to sometimes, do the work on yourself. And that can also be a really tough place to start. But most of us are already in teams, and, having the opportunity to practice these things on a much maybe more accessible level every day. I mean, I feel like for me personally, if I start a call, like a Zoom call or, whatever video call, and I'm sure we used to do this when we met in person too. Like, we walk into a room or we walk into a Zoom room now, and like, it's all too easy to jump straight into an agenda or what the plan is, and I know sometimes it can be quite uncomfortable actually to not do that. It's almost easier to jump straight into that rather than do the like, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? Ask an additional question. When someone says they're okay, maybe just, give them another opportunity to provide a secondary statement to that, because you probably know they're not quite okay. Like all those things that like we probably did when we met in person, and we definitely did at the beginning of COVID. Everybody took 10 minutes at the beginning of a call. So where did that go? And it's even if it's tricky, you know, I don't know. I was saying something the other day, like sometimes I use things like in people's backgrounds and stuff, you know, like most people have got a background, even if it's a fake one on a Zoom thing. Like you can comment, you know, like, oh, hey, where's that picture from? Oh, I love, you know, you've got a flower in your background, you know, like you only need something as small as that as a starter to just, usually the majority of times somebody will just go, oh, and then they'll start to tell you something about themselves, and then you've got it. Like that's the bit, like, and then I think holding that for a minute or two and engaging in it and both quote unquote seeing each other in that moment, you know, you've created then that connection that then allows you to do all the agenda and all the stuff that needed to be talked about in the project board and all the rest of it anyway. And the irony is you'll probably get it done in half the speed with more effectiveness, and everybody will leave the call feeling much more full and whole from it. But it's not something that's practiced a lot. And I you know, I think it's actually quite a tangible thing to try.
Yeah, and I remember seeing an article late last week, early this week about how the number of employees that kind of feel meh about work, or just I don't really like feeling fulfilled, or just they're not happy with the experience at the job is up a whole lot. I think it comes down to there not being that sense of connection with the people, especially with the leaders that they're supposedly working for or with. And it's has a huge detriment to the people, the employees' performance and how they show up, and their own mental health, and how long, and like this, and it helps, in fact, impacts the business and how the customers experience, because if the employees aren't happy, then the customers aren't going to be. And so there's this, when the leaders are in a like company's leadership are thinking about how to solve these problems, how to increase growth, I think building these what seemingly insignificant habits that have a huge ripple effect on people's well-being and sense of connectedness is an important place to start. And something you mentioned before we started the call about that, you were just on this trip to Ecuador and hike up the big mountain. And when you mentioned that even though you were exhausted and drained and you put all this effort into getting over the rim, what made the achievement feel worthwhile was the people around you and the connectedness you felt. And if you're trying to get people at a business to metaphorically scale a mountain with you and achieve this big result, they're not going to get the payoff unless they feel connected. And it's because it's not just the fact you made up the mountain, but it's the people you made it up with you and the experience that really makes it worthwhile. And that sort of awareness of the need for this connection, I think, has been lost in a lot of companies, and the way the way the leadership shows up for their teams.
Yeah, I guess it's a bit like that kind of time under tension thing, isn't it? It's like the idea of, you know, it's how you build muscle too, right? Like when you want to build muscle, you tear the muscles so just enough so that when they come back together, they come back together stronger, you know, like, and I guess that's how sports teams work. It's how orchestras work. It's how, you know, like it's all about that, right? And I think it's funny, I think a lot about this. I do quite a lot of mentoring with young people. One of the things I'm very grateful about in my own career is, you know, at a very, very young age, while still studying at school, I joined an organization, and because of that, had so many deep connections. You know, I mentioned earlier, like I still work with many, many, many of the same people I worked with 20 years ago, you know, when I first started my career. And I think about it almost like a boardroom table, you know, and it's my boardroom table. Like the irony is they never meet, actually. Some of them may have met, but like we don't have a boardroom meeting. But every single one of those people is there for a reason. Every single one of us have time and attention for different capacities. And no one, you know, they don't have to be good at two things. No one has to be good at everything either, you know, like, and I think that like building that, and it's something that personally I feel is good if you start building it young, but there is no reason you can't build it at any point, you know, like who are those people? Like if you close your eyes and you want to create your own boardroom table, like who are the just start with 5, like who are those people and why are they there? And firstly, can you identify it and do you know about that? Secondly, do they know they're that person? Because I think that's really important too. And then thirdly, find a way for that connection to exist regularly. Like ask them to put something in every month, ask them, I've moved 3 or 4 times in my life. I live around the world from many of the people I love, but you have to put effort in to do that. So, does that mean I also work freelance and fractional. And so I have various friends where we have like every other week, we have a meeting, like it's a 1-to-1, but we do it so that we can have that consistency with each other. We can help each other out with personal things or with work things or with whatever. And that's it. That's your team. Like that's your club. That's your orchestra. That's your, whatever and I really think that like, you have to nourish that. You have to know it's important to you. You have to understand you need it, and you have to nourish it and practice it, and if you do that, pretty quickly, and sometimes in very tiny ways, you feel that connection, and it will almost always help you connect with yourself as well, which then just becomes this self-perpetuating thing, which ultimately is what we're talking about.
And I love that you mentioned that when you do these 1-to-1s with your team, that you help each other with personal things, not just with work-related things, because I think that level of relationship goes beyond just a work relationship. It becomes a friendship. It becomes a partnership. It becomes a real connection.
Yeah.
And that balance and that personalized nature of it is what I think allows you to have, you said, like work with the same people for 20 years. If it was just transactional, I doubt it would last 20 years because it doesn't have enough of the fulfillment and you need that personal element to it to really have it last a long time. And I love that you start with like 5 people and really focus on building those relationships strong. And once people put in the effort and the focus on those 5 people, like Andy said, with building a muscle, it becomes a lot easier to expand that out and have a much stronger connections with people that are really helping you succeed in the business sense, but also thrive on an emotional level, on a personal level, and feel really connected to the people you're doing business with and you have in your life, compared to just having the colleagues or coworkers, which is a very sterile term. Whereas if you have partners and friends and real connections, that's the sort of balance to life that I think a lot of entrepreneurs miss out on because they're so focused on making the business work. They forget about building the personal side of things that makes achieving the success they're going for worthwhile and enjoyable.
And that's actually, it's funny you says, part of the reason I work with very early stage founders, because I think a lot of very early stage founders, whether they're from the go-to-market side or a product side, are, they are clear on their why. I mean, it's hard, to start businesses. It's extremely hard, and it does take all of you. You are a full human in that moment. But what is for me, one of the beautiful gifts about working with really early stage founders is not just the ability to kind of help them to say, okay, we can keep going with the ideas and we can keep going with the strategy, but we've also got to just make some stuff happen here. I love that piece. But I also love the piece, and it's why the chief of staff role is very fulfilling for me, where as that gets a little bit bigger, and I tend to not work with anything bigger than Series A. I'm a chaos wrangler, but that also means I'm a disruptor. And so once you start wanting to put process in place, you probably don't want me. But what I love is those moments where, like you say, like there are so many opportunities to forget the reason why as a founder you started. And to some extent, you can't even see them in your business anymore, depending on how fast that business is growing and the way it's doing it. But to be somebody who has access to that founder and can like do everything that they quote unquote need on paper, but also go oh, you know what? You saw that Joe did that the other day. And do you remember when ages ago, like a year ago, you wanted him to do that and that happened? Just so you know, he did that. There's no way you could create visibility for that to happen for that founder otherwise. And that might be the one thing that week that individual needed to have the power and the strength to deal with all the other rubbish that you deal with as a founder and things. And that's connectivity to me. That is humanness. That's wise. That's all of what we're talking about. So yeah, I mean, it's a very, very place I'm very grateful to be in. Very, very, very lucky girl.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for connecting with me today, Siobhan. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection podcast, please leave a review, and share it. If you'd like to connect with myself or Siobhan, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.